Wrong way. Put it this way. Enough to do. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I need to adjust my position here. This is the start of the webinar. We're just going to wait for people to join on. We'll give it 2 minutes whilst the main attendees log in. There's a sort of spooling effect where everyone joins. So we'll give a 30-second grace note to allow people to come in. Okay, well, we've got a few people joined. We're expecting about 150 or so to join us today. So good morning, a beautiful morning in London. I know we've got people joining us from throughout the world this morning, but in London we're moving towards being the hottest day of the year. So it's mercifully cool in my office, but I dare say elsewhere it's going to get quite sticky. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you today. We're going to be formally launching the new Insight Hub, which is a new area of the ETOA website, which we've decided to create, which is going to, well, you'll be hearing about it all in a second, but the principal idea behind it was to gather all the research that is taking place out there in tourism and try to provide some kind of commentary and critique over it. We know there's a hell of a lot of research. We know that it needs to be assembled, but we also know that the quality of this research and indeed the way it's gathered requires some degree of editing and some degree of analysis. That's why I'm delighted that we've got the two people that we've got in charge of it. Rachel Reed, who is the head of research at ETOA. She comes with a formidable academic research background, both from UCL and the London School of Economics. And we also have I'm delighted to say we're now joined as part of ETOA, David Edwards, formerly head of research at VisitBritain. He lastly then went on to work in Jersey and is now working freelance, and we're delighted to have him working for ETOA, particularly on this Insight Hub. You've probably heard enough from me for the time being. I will be popping in and out like a bad meal throughout this throughout this webinar. But I'm going to hand you over to Rachel, who's very much in charge of this project. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first webinar in what we hope will be a series from the ETOA Insight Hub. And today we're going to kick off with the broad theme of landscape for a post-pandemic travel industry. That feels very relevant. The idea is, though, that as we work through with the Insight Hub, every time we do a webinar, we'll pick a theme and pull a few pieces out of the hub to cover off around that theme. But obviously today, I have another job to do, which is to introduce the hub. As Tom mentioned, it is a new statistical and insight service for our members and partners and stakeholders, and occasionally the media. Principally, we want to have lots of up-to-date research in one place, but also, as Tom alluded to, make it accessible and relevant to you, because there's so much out there. Some of it is very, very dense. It's quite difficult to get to what you need. And honestly, sometimes you don't need to read all 85 pages to get what you need. So we have, with the pieces we've provided, we've tried to make them accessible with summaries, so that you can actually get a gist of what it is and the takeaways, and then click through to the full detail if you like. And in a moment, I will share my screen and show you the hub, which is live on our website. I'm going to show you a few pieces, and I won't go into all the detail of what they are, but just to give you a flavour of the different types of things we've got up there. We've arranged everything by category, and we've got some very in-depth stats-based research. We've got opinion pieces, press articles, We will have all of these ETOA webinars up there, and we've got our explainer videos, which we rather humorously decided to call ETOA Shorts, which launching in the summer. I'm not sure how sensible that was, but that's what we're calling them at the moment, the explainer videos. So I'm going to have a look at the hub in a moment. I'll show you some of the pieces and then mention a couple of the next steps as to where we want this to go, and your input is very much welcome as to what you would like to see. We actually have a new address for Insight, which is insight@etoa.org, so you're very welcome to send your suggestions through, or indeed if you have research yourself. We are keen to showcase things that our members are doing particularly. So I will now share my screen and I will show you what is up there now. It just went up on the site yesterday and I think I should be able to see. Can my screen be seen? Yes. I hope so. Yes, good. So you will now find it up here on the main menu, the Insight Hub. So if you click that, you will be able to go into the hub. And here it is. And as I was mentioning, we've got here all the pieces, so you'll see them listed on this listing here. They're just listed by date, so the newest is up there first, and over here you can see as well that the latest few pieces are listed on there. So obviously as we grow, the listing will get larger. When you get to the bottom though, you can just click on the next one or the next one if you want to just see everything that's in there. But of course most people, as we scroll through, there are more things. Most people they will want to look by category. So here we are, say you were interested in some of the things in the hotel sector, you could click accommodation as I just have done, and then you will see here are some things. We've got something from RateGain, who's one of our members, STR, that produce lots of credible statistics there. So you can do things by category. We've categorized them in several areas. So say, for example, this one on STR is about hotel performance during COVID-19. If I were to go to this one, coronavirus category, it would also appear in there. So things are in more than one place if they're relevant to that category. So it's not a case of hunting around looking for stuff. You know, everything will appear in whichever category that it's relevant. So if I just perhaps pick up on a couple of things, I'm going to click actually the latest thing that I added. You'll see some of them have this yellow members icon, which means that that's only for members. So it's very important that this is a service for our members. We don't want everybody to be able to access all of the things. A few pieces are not. Our press interviews, for example, are accessible to everybody, but the majority of it is what we call gated. It's for members only. So you will need to have your login, your member login. If you don't have that, you can ask, just drop us an email or your account manager, and we can certainly help you if you don't have a member login. But if I click on this piece, David, as Tom has mentioned, has excellent pedigree in tourism research, and he has written a piece for us about interpreting the stats. You know, why is it that arrivals from a place don't seem to match the departures, and why is it that in France tourists are classed in one way and Italy it's another, and how can we sort of get to the bottom of that when we're actually looking at tourism statistics? And what you'll see here is this is how all of them are laid out. So there's a summary here which tells you, you know, what the document's about in a nutshell. And then if you wish, you can then click onto here to either download a PDF or it will take you to a website depending on the layout of the piece. So that's roughly how the hub works. I think that we've got some quite interesting pieces, for example, in economic indicators. So we've got quite a broad range of categories, something very high level, so total sort of global economy type things, down to destinations, individual destinations, origin markets, etc. So we've got quite a range in terms of the level of the pieces. If I pull out economic indicators, for example, you can see all sorts of the things that I've been mentioning. I think one thing that's a really helpful thing is David's written a little summary here of the UNWTO tourism data dashboard, so you can see there a variety of different tools that will give you some fairly macro level economic indicators, and then down to a regional country level. So again, if you were to click that, I won't go through the whole thing, just as an example, if you click this, you'll then go on to the summary that we have, which is here, so you can see what you're going to get, and then you can then link through to the actual dashboard itself. So that is quite a useful piece. We've got some webinars from Euromonitor in there. Oh, there was one, sorry, I just missed that one. I'll go back down. You can see here we've got this one here, the Euromonitor webinar on the implications of COVID-19 for the global economy. We've got work from our partners. One of the things that we want to do with the hub is to be able to showcase some of the work that our partners are doing, people like SELF, the academic institution in the Netherlands, Nestor, the ETC, the European Travel Council, all of whom produce some excellent statistics and research, and we are going to be showcasing some of those. Say, for example, if I go to origin markets, we have an interesting piece from the ETC, which is their long-haul travel sentiment index, which they produce quarterly, and we've got the latest one here. It's quite a detailed infographic with a lot of information on it, so David has helpfully written a summary for us, again, so that you can get a feel for it if you don't perhaps have time to go into the whole thing at that time. We've also got some pieces just from the press. So I put in a piece which was from Skift about the pivot to domestic, which here is this one here, about what might happen if all of the international travel demand is shifted to domestic, and how that might look, and which countries may be winners, which may be losers if we were to have that scenario. So I put that one in. You can also see as many press interviews as we have videos for. So, for example, here we've got Tom speaking about COVID corridors on a BBC radio interview. That's one of the pieces that's universally available, but in that instance, you can see a very brief synopsis, and then if you want to click on the press interview, you can do so. We've also, at the moment, found some very interesting bits around different post-pandemic scenarios. We've obviously got the recovery period, but there's been a lot of discussion around what the industry might look like after the initial shock is off and we can start traveling again. And obviously this is one of the things that David is going to be covering, because he's written a very detailed piece around the 3Ns theory that he's developed, and obviously he'll be covering that in a moment. Before I hand over to him, though, I would like to just point out one of the ones that we have put in here, which is from Doug Lansky, who is I suppose one would call him a tourism talking head, an author in the tourism industry, and he's written a couple of pieces which you can see here, a couple of very accessible videos, one on the new normal in tourism, where he talks to Bhutan and Amsterdam around how they are rethinking themselves, and then this piece here, which is a very interesting video about how this opportunity may present itself to help destinations address capacity management. And he's got some very thought-provoking pieces on there around how we could actually capitalise on this and go forward into the post-pandemic world, addressing one of the big problems we've had thus far in Europe around capacity management. So that's a very interesting video as well, which again is summarised if you go in there. And probably last one from me, just to show you an example. This is an ETOA short, which are our short videos. They're meant to be very brief. This one is where Tom is talking about Brexit, which seems like so long ago anymore. We were only talking exclusively about Brexit about 4 months ago. Obviously, it's barely touched our consciousness, but we do still have some Brexit things in there. And Tom here is giving a very brief explanation of the key issues Brexit that are concerned to the travel industry, for example. So we have about 5 or 6 of these shorts videos, which are very useful for the key issues in a nutshell, basically. I think I'll probably stop there because I think it's quite easy for you to have a look around the hub. We will be carrying out a poll in a moment, actually, because as I say, we do want to get a good feel for how it's working for our members and what you would like to see on this hub, because it is, after all, a member service. So I think perhaps before we move into David's piece around the 3 M's, could we launch the first poll, which is around what topics you would like to see? I will just move from here.
Indeed. I'm just trying to launch it. We're going to raise a question now. I'd be very grateful if you could answer this, this poll, which you'll see on your screen as I click here. It's very simple. What other topics would you like to see on the ETOA Insight Hub? We've got sustainability, value of tourism, economic and cultural, smart cities, MICE, and anything other. You can send a comment in chat. I would also say that we're here to answer questions. If you've got any questions, both about the Insight Hub or indeed any topics governing tourism research, we'd be delighted to hear from you. You've got an open question panel on your drop down, on your menu, on your screen there. So please submit questions in that area. And thank you for voting in this poll. I'm looking at about, we'll wait until the number of viewers has hit about 60 to 70%, and then I'll close it, which will be in a couple of moments. You can click, obviously, more than one if you choose. And we're getting to about 2/3 of the viewers responding now. So I'm now going to close the poll. The result, for what it's worth, is that the biggest winner is the value of tourism. They want to know what the value of tourism is, partly because we want to be able to prove what the value of tourism is to everybody. And the next, and 70% of people thought that the value of tourism was important. 53% thought sustainability was important. Smart cities, and I know plenty of cities, not all of them are smart, are nearly 40%, and MICE is 21%. Other is a small runner-up. Thank you very much for doing that. I'm now going to close the poll, and I'm going to hand you over to David, I believe. David.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working with ETOA, especially on the Insight Hub, which is a fabulous initiative for members, and I do hope that members use the hub and indeed start contributing to the hub. I am now hopefully sharing my screen with you, and you will be seeing a slide. And for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to be introducing what I'm terming the essential ingredients for tourism recovery, this 3 M's framework. So what are we going to be covering? Well, I'm going to remind ourselves as to the size of the prize in terms of tourism within Europe. I'm then going to introduce the 3 M's framework, describe what I'm terming the actors that will shape the future and underpin those 3 M's, and then think about what this might all mean for different market segments. So in a sense, that's the 4th M. So being a bit of a traditionalist, I will begin at the top of that list by looking at the size of the prize. So what we're looking at here, and frankly, every presentation should have a trend chart, so here it is the number of international arrivals in Europe over the past 40 or so years. And we can see that by and large, the trend has been moving upwards, with certainly 1 or 2 little blips. More noticeably, you can see the global financial crisis back in 2008 to 2009. But, and following on from the poll that we've just had, it is indeed about value, perhaps more so than volume. And the latest estimates are that international tourists contributed about $572 billion to the European economies in 2019. And that, as you can see in the box there, is equivalent to earnings of about $770 per arrival. Back in 1980, and I'm sure that I'm not the only person participating this morning who can actually remember 1980, but back in 1980, 64% of all global arrivals were to somewhere in Europe. Fast forward to last year, and it's 51% of all global arrivals that are in Europe. What does that mean? Well, it means that despite the growth that Europe has enjoyed over those 40 or so years, it has lost market share. And that's for two broad reasons. Reason one is that there are now just far more places that people can go to around the world. And reason two is that competition has become fiercer. So there's more competition and it's fiercer. Clearly, this trend chart is going to take on a somewhat different complexion over the months and year or so ahead. The latest estimate from UNWTO is that during the first 4 months of 2020, the number of arrivals in Europe were 44% down on where they were in the equivalent 4 months of last year. That year-to-date decline is going to accelerate for at least another couple of months. And where will we end 2020? Well, if we look at this chart, I would be flabbergasted, frankly, if we end 2020 above the 500 million line. I think it's much more likely we will be back somewhere akin to the late 1990s, so perhaps in the region of 350 to 400 million. Onwards then to our 3 M's. What are they? Well, they are motivation to visit, money to spend, and means of travel. So I guess my central argument is that you need all of these 3 to be in place for tourism to happen. Let's begin then with motivation to visit and some good news. Any research that I've seen over recent years and I'm likely to see in the future suggests that the bulk of people place enormous value on their leisure time. They want to do good, memorable stuff with that leisure time. And indeed, taking a holiday is one of the ways that people can fulfill that need. And if you look at the whole raft of different motivators of destination choice, having fun and laughter often crops up as one of the reasons people choose to go on a holiday or a short break. And that again is not going to go away, but arguably it's being somewhat tempered now by an increased sense of anxiety. And we can say that there's a real changed perception of risk versus reward at the present time. And that is likely to impact the types of destinations that people select, perhaps the forms of accommodation that they want to stay in, and also the forms of activity that they will engage in whilst they're on their holiday. Now, trust me, there will be an intrepid band of domestic and indeed international travellers as soon as it becomes allowable and feasible to travel once again. But one of the other big motivators of destination choice is this thing called advocacy. So what it is that our friends, our relatives, our work colleagues say to us about the travel experiences that we have had. So one of the really big unknowns at the moment is what will that intrepid band of travellers say during on social media and when they return in social media and in real life to those that they communicate with. Will they say, well, it was a bit different to normal, but I still had a fantastic time? Or will they say, gosh, that was just so regimented, constantly being told to queue, constantly being told to wear a face covering, constantly having to book everything I wanted to do in advance because you couldn't just rock up spontaneously? And in short, will they say, do you know, I'm not really sure that was worth it. It was just too regimented. That, as I say, is a real unknown in terms of the motivation for the upcoming period. So you're motivated to go somewhere. You need money to spend, both to be able to get there and indeed to enjoy yourself once you're there. And I started the last slide by saying, here's some good news. I'm starting this one by saying, here's some bad news. Because frankly, economically, I would argue that the worst is yet to come. In many ways, there's a phony war going on when you look at many of the main economic measures that are being talked about at the moment, because government schemes, both in the UK and in many other countries, are in a sense disguising the longer term economic impact that might be felt. Are there any lessons, though, that we can draw from the last economic shock back in 2008-9? Well, as we saw from the earlier trend chart, tourist arrivals in Europe did dip in that year, which suggests to us that, yes, economics does have an influence on tourism. But what we also saw back in 2009 was that people largely didn't stop taking holidays. They changed their behaviours. They perhaps holidayed domestically or took a few less breaks than they would do so in a normal year. One of the other considerations in terms of money at the present time is that many consumers will have had something of a battle if they've had a trip cancelled to get a refund. And as a consequence of that, they may well be thinking, pondering 2021, do I want to invest a large amount of money on a long haul trip? Or do I think, let's keep things a little bit more local in case it does get cancelled? Now, I think certainly here in the UK, and I'm sure in many other countries as well, there's a minority, perhaps possibly quite a substantial minority, of households who will have seen their income not fall during the past few months because they have remained in employment, but whose outgoings will have been somewhat constrained because, frankly, it's really difficult to spend money when many of the ways in which people traditionally have been spending money on leisure activities are forbidden. So it will be fascinating to see whether that money which has grown in people's bank accounts gets used by people as they can start doing things again, or will they be very cautious about the upcoming period and just decide, maybe I shall save a little bit more. So you've got the motivation, you've got the money, but you need a means of getting to where you're going. And at present, lots of talk of bubbles, and the ultimate bubble when it comes to transport is, of course, the private car. In the UK, around about 3/4 to 4/5 of all households own a car. That, of course, means that between 1/5 and 1/4 don't. But for those who do, clearly that is going to be a somewhat more appealing option for a holiday, short break, or a day out than using public transport, especially when you're being lobbied very strongly by government and others not to use public transport at the present time. Airlines are starting very slowly to operate more flights again, but for the foreseeable future, hello, I've come back seeing me rather than my screen. Hopefully you're back seeing my screen again. Airlines are starting to operate more flights, but there's a very strong chance that they will continue to operate at a lower level than has been the case. Most airlines have come to the view now that 2023 is going to be the next year that will be akin to 2019. And in the short term, we will possibly see some real bargain fares as airlines try to get people to come back into flying and traveling internationally. But I would argue that considering the higher costs that airlines are going to be enduring and the relatively weak demand that we're likely to see over the medium term, probably fares are going to go up. Indeed, part of the bailout agreement that Austrian airlines have been granted by the Austrian government is that there will be minimum fares of 40 euros and new taxes on short and medium haul flights. For those who think wistfully of the trolley coming down the aisle and being offered the exciting choice of chicken or beef, well, that's probably a distant memory for the at least immediate future. Most airlines are saying you will get pre-packed snacks, even if you're traveling the long haul. They're saying you will have to ask permission if you want to use the loo. They're saying you have to wear a face covering and possibly change that covering every 4 hours. Now, will people who start to travel sit there on a long haul flight and think, this perhaps isn't screaming I'm on holiday to me as they endure that long haul experience? There are also very many practical and psychological barriers that are cropping up in terms of people's worries and concerns about, should I be traveling? What will the travel experience be like at the present time? Now, for the most part, we move around once we've reached a destination, be it on perhaps a tour bus or on local public transport, and this is particularly the case in more urban destinations. So here again, we've got considerations to ponder. Will there be the capacity? Will there be the will of visitors to use local forms of public transport? And indeed, will central and local governments be willing to stump up the cash to keep public transport networks operating with prolonged lower levels of demand? Introducing then our cast of actors underpinning the 3 M's for the future. They're the virus, governments, international community, economic activity, visitor economy businesses, local residents, and last but certainly not least, visitors. Starting with the virus. Anyone who thinks the virus is going to say, well, do you know what, I've had my 5-minute of fame, I'm off, is sadly misguided. The virus will be with us so long as there is a person alive carrying it, or it's lurking on a surface somewhere. And arguably without the mitigation factors in place, mitigation measures in place, it can be just as impactful in the future as it has been in the past. There may well be a vaccine in due course, but if there are banner headlines in a few months' time saying vaccine found, anyone thinking, oh great, a month or 2 from now, everybody will be vaccinating, again is going to be sorely disappointed. A vaccination program at the population level will take years, not months. So it will be a case of monitoring the rise and fall of the magical R letter and also the number of infected individuals. Clearly, there is good progress in terms of effective treatments at the present time, and hopefully that will continue, but the virus will remain among us. So ultimately, this boils down to a really big debate, if you like, about risk versus reward at the level of government, at the level of business, and at the level, importantly, of society. To what extent do we want to take the view of, this is really scary, I'm going to do as little as possible to expose myself to it, even if that means I don't do all the things that I used to enjoy doing? Or at the other end of the extreme, will people say, do you know what, below this, I don't think that the risk is very great to me, I'm therefore going to start doing all the stuff that I really love doing? Or will it fall somewhere between those 2 extremes? And that, to an extent, will determine the volume and nature of tourism we see going forward. On to governments, and in a sense, putting a society into lockdown was relatively straightforward. But when you've got different tiers of government, all of whom can impose different sets of rules, it's very difficult to bring societies out of lockdown in a consistent fashion. And arguably, for tourism to work, you really do need, both at the national and international level, this consistency. There have been remarkable schemes imposed by governments to try and support their national economies, but will they continue for very much longer? And if there is the dreaded second wave, will governments feel the ability to be as generous? In the longer term, will they just say, do you know what, we're going to have to live with much higher levels of borrowing? Will they say taxes are going to have to go up? Will they do both? But one of the things that we can be fairly certain of is that there's going to be pressure on public spending. In the short term, I reckon that destination management organisations will probably be lining up to say, we need a recovery fund, and probably governments will say, we agree, here's some extra cash. But if we fast forward 2 or 3 years, I think there will be some very hard conversations to get funding for marketing. On to the international community. Hopefully I'm not shocking anybody here by saying it's probably not been its finest hour over the past 6 or so months. And this, of course, comes on a backdrop where we live in a world where there's great pressure on internationalism and people are really starting to think in a more inward than outward fashion. This is at a time where we would really benefit from a coordinated rather than a scattergun approach to tourism. Is that what we're seeing? Well, I think it is rather perhaps more scattergun than coordinated at the moment. But there are these issues such as government advisories about the whether or not it's allowable to travel. Then we've got schemes such as temperature checks as you either leave or arrive in a country, various sometimes aborted attempts at developing apps, talk of immunity passports going forward. then various forms of quarantine, rules about face coverings. There at the moment is very little in the way of a consistent rule book, and that is something that will be, I think, very helpful to help tourism revive. In terms of economic activity, there will be fewer businesses, there will be higher unemployment in the months ahead. And at the moment, most people would say, well, inflation isn't really something we have to worry about. If anything, it's really falling. But I would argue that a year or so from now, we may well see inflationary pressure as businesses that have survived are still incurring higher costs, but having to think, how do I reap some revenue? And that will potentially be through upping prices. There's also this thing called the paradox of thrift, whereby businesses that have survived are so focused on rebuilding their balance sheets, they're not really thinking about doing investments. And that means all those other companies in the supply chain who would normally fulfill those investments are seeing their order books looking rather empty. We've seen a dramatic shift clearly from commuting to home working. And whilst I'm absolutely sure that people will start return to offices, I think we probably have seen a change in terms of the volume of home working as businesses decide, oh, we can get lots more staff to work from home and we can thereby save some money on all this expensive office space. That then has an impact on all of those local businesses in areas of high commuting density that serve both commuters and visitors, be they coffee bars, pubs, sandwich shops. All of those hospitality type businesses will face a challenge. And there's clearly also been a step change in the use of virtual meeting technology. We saw this morning that there's been a 20-fold increase in the number of people using Zoom in the past 6 months. And yes, probably we are at a peak level at the moment. But I think that, again, many businesses will, as a cost-cutting measure, potentially think, let's use technology more than we did in the past. Visitor economy businesses will see lower demand for the next year at least. They will also be having to restrict their supply. And that means that we have to ponder, where will the new equilibrium of demand and supply be? There are a whole host of new operational challenges that visitor economy businesses are having to confront, be that ticketing of all visitors, be that providing perspex screens or face coverings to staff, or a whole host of new costs and challenges. And that then calls into question the economic viability of some visitor economy businesses, which in turn, if visitors start going to places and a substantial number of pubs, attractions, restaurant, hotels are shuttered, then the vibe that perhaps people used to enjoy in that destination is somewhat denuded. Plus, we will potentially see visitor economy businesses having to learn to work with different visitors to those that they've had in the past. If we do see this pivot to domestic that Rachel alluded to, and we may well see visitors behaving in a different way. People actually may be really nervous about being close to other people for quite a sustained period of time. There are also reputational issues going on here in terms of, will you be offering an experience that visitors think is safe and secure, but also actually enjoy at your premises? Increasingly, those who are delivering the frontline experience may have to evolve further the brilliant skills that they already have if they are having to do new things such as police social distancing. So there are more and more challenges there going on for visitor economy businesses. But there is a short-term opportunity potentially to diversify. Lots of hotels have banqueting areas, their dining areas, their conference rooms. Meanwhile, we hear about all of the challenges that schools and other are suffering in terms of not having sufficient space to spread out. Maybe there is an opportunity over the rest of 2020 to use some of those spaces in different ways. Local residents, or the communities where tourism actually happens, where local residents are likely to see their income under pressure, and that may narrow their travel horizons. They may also be a little bit apprehensive, and that too could mean they think local rather than regional, national, international. But if they are doing things locally, will they go back to doing all the stuff they used to do, or will we have seen a real sea change in people, as I put it here, taking away rather than eating in? And here in the UK, and I'm sure in many other countries, especially in more rural communities, what we have seen is people being, let's call it, nervous about welcoming back visitors. At the moment, the red carpet is not being rolled out. People are thinking, we've quashed the virus in our area. We really are rather worried about it being brought in. So that is a real challenge for destination management over the next few months. On to visitors. I think it's fair to say they're going to be seeking less crowded destinations. They're going to be recalibrating the types of accommodation that they want to stay in and thinking about the transport options. Those still paying attention will see in smaller font in yellow the word feature going on there. We can think of features as perhaps being the walls and the roof of the tourism house. But what makes a house a home? Well, it's a soft furnishing. And in terms of tourism, that's more about the benefits that people get from an experience. Some of the benefits they will still be wanting include excellent value for money, to go home thinking that was worth it. They will still be wanting that warm welcome, so there's that challenge if host communities are somewhat apprehensive, and they will still be wanting a brilliant experience. Yes, they may want their hotel, their bars, the pubs, the attractions, the transport they use to have been sanitized, but they won't want their experience to have been sanitized. Oh, this is pretty, isn't it? So this is taken from the OECD's analysis of consumer confidence. And what I've done here is bring together the latest trends on consumer confidence in a range of long-haul source markets for Europe. And as you can see, there has been a plummeting trend for how confident consumers feel, especially for those countries that have published their May data. Always when you are looking at trend charts, you're thinking, oh, what's it going to do next? Will it continue to fall? Will it plateau for many months? Or will we see that much vaunted V-shaped recovery in consumer confidence? Sadly, only time will tell. I'm not going to dwell on this one too much, but this is what I'm calling the 4th M. So it's really looking at market segments and trying to think about the next year broken down into 3 periods, and then mull over, well, how promising, given our thoughts about motivation, money, and means of transport, do we reckon each of these different types of market segment are likely to be? And it's not a forecast, it's just a hypothesis in a sense, but it perhaps again helps us understand where some of the bigger opportunities are likely to be and where some of the stronger headwinds are likely to be going forward. That, I'm sure you will be delighted to know, is me done. I think we are now going to, before doing a Q&A, have some more polls. So what I'm going to do is allow, I think, Tom to be presenter again. So Tom, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, David. I would point out that both the presentation and indeed this webinar will, I'm sure, be available on our Insight Hub. It's very interesting the point you made about thrift and about how companies will not be investing or may not be investing in a time of great financial stress. I would quietly point out that ETOA, whilst it's not all roses at the moment, has made a decision to invest in an Insight Hub, and this is what we're talking about at the moment. So this is our core confidence in the vital necessity of keeping people informed. I'm going to launch another poll, if I may, and then we'll go on to questions, I believe, in a second. But the next polling question is going to be, excuse me, that was the result of the last one. I'll pick the next one. Just got, I'm going to launch this. It's fairly straightforward. It's the question is, the economic downturn and impact on personal finances of coronavirus will be just as damaging to the industry as the virus itself. The question: do you agree, strongly agree, slightly agree, not sure, slightly? This is a very simple question. You don't have to think too much about it. There are not many. You only have to come up with one answer. People delightfully are thundering in with the answers. I'll close it in about 5 seconds to 10 seconds. So please put your vote in, it's very important. And we've got nearly 2/3, we've got over 2/3 of the people responding, so put your opinion in now or forever hold your peace. Thank you very much. We'll go through that now. Thanks a lot. And I can share the results, which simply say that 68% strongly agree that the economic downturn and the impact on personal finances will be just as damaging to the industry as the virus itself. So we'll hide that. And I will, Rachel, do you have anything to comment on, or shall I go straight to the questions? You're on mute.
Really, in a moment we can go to the third question, Tom. Really, just to say, you were saying David's things will be on the Insight Hub. There's already a PDF version of the presentation that he's just given with a summary that's already available today. But yes, we will be moving all of the webinar recordings over there shortly as well. So yes is the answer to that.
Well, I've got a rate. People have been very good at filing questions. None of them easy. These questions, some of them frankly impossible. I think the first question is a general question, if I may ask, that rises from these, is that for reasons which those of us in the industry know very well, the really vital question is what is going to be the prospect for group travel. We know that the FIT market is both larger and in some ways more easy to identify with. But the thing that makes the industry tick is groups. And we've got a lot of people saying, do we think, what is the prospect for groups? And I think if we can't answer that question, I suppose the question to twist it around is to say, how do we find data on group demand and prospective group demand? Can I throw that at David to start off with?
I guess the easy part of the answer is that the headwinds for group travel are absolutely, for the next several months, far stronger than they are for FIT. I think that's not going to surprise anybody, because we are being here, and I'm sure around the world, regularly reminded that we should minimize our social contacts, and we should especially minimize social contact with those who are outside of our close bubble of family. Therefore, I think prospects for this year are very, very tough. And for those types of destinations that would perhaps see strong demand in the early part of the calendar year, so be getting bookings in the back end of this calendar year, I think they will again be struggling, because people will be very nervous about traveling in groups. Maybe one of the solutions is finding ways of getting extended families to travel more as groups, so intergenerational travel, those sorts of things. I know that's a much smaller scale in terms of groups than much of the industry would be used to. But I don't think that in the next 6 to 18 months, it's going to be an easy task to persuade many people to voluntarily put themselves into a position of being exposed to lots of other people they don't know, especially coming back to one of the things I was talking about in the slide, is if, as being part of a group, you are given a whole list of diktats in terms of these are the things you must, or these are the things you must do, these are the measures that you must comply with. Everything that is eroding the fun element of being on a trip is just making it, people think, oh, do you know what? I could do other things with my disposable income other than be here being told to wash my hands. And it's a really challenging one. So I guess in terms of the other part of your question, in terms of where is their data, that is working with those parts of the industry who are heavily reliant upon this sort of demand, just to try and monitor what sort of web traffic are you getting, what sort of level of inquiries, speculative inquiries are you getting at the moment. I think it will be months rather than weeks before we see bookings starting to come through in larger numbers, but there are ways of just trying to figure out, are there metrics that give us a flag as to where people are on that decision-making funnel? in terms of a group type of trip?
Rachel, do you have any comment to make?
Yes, I think obviously David's talking about the demand end and what that might look like. One thing we've already started doing in our policy team is thinking about the visitor experience at the other end when they actually arrive and what that might be like being on a coach. Because in some ways, coaches are a bit of a sitting duck for those looking for an easy political win, if you like, in terms of, well, you can only run at 10% capacity, or all these things that have been kind of thrown out there. And one of the things that we've already started working on is a campaign to try and ensure that group tourism, tourist coaches, are subject to the same restrictions, or ones that are no less punitive than public transport, because I think that's a really important thing. Two things, obviously, if you've got one rule for public transport and one for coach tourism, that doesn't really make sense when they're both in an enclosed bus. It must be the same rules. And I think another thing that we're already working on is pointing out, again, this issue with regards to public transport and distance. You're actually bringing a group of people to the town who are not using public transport. They're actually off public transport, and you've got visitors coming who are not clogging up the transport system, which again is something that is considered, needs to be considered into the factor as well. So I think it's important to say that we're already starting the work on what the visitor experience might be in destination on a tourist bus. Yeah.
Okay. The other big ask we've got from the question zone is a similar question, but about mice. The meetings in the incentive industry are I suppose, a group travel exercise, but they come with a slightly more commercial flavour. I think it's probably the right phrase. David, is there any way we can get any purchase on what future demand for mice is going to be looking like in Europe?
I think again here there is a challenge, and as well as the challenge of can we persuade governments and other decision makers to realise that one of the ways in which mice is perhaps somewhat different to other quote unquote mass gatherings is that it is extremely easy to be able to record who it is that is in attendance, and to perhaps impose rather more control on the amount of distance that there are between delegates at a conference or an exhibition than it would be at a large sporting or concert venue. So I think there has to be a job continually done to remind people that mice is a rather different type of mass gathering to some of those other forms of mass gathering. But one of the other challenges, I guess, is again coming back to businesses thinking about their balance sheets. Will they, for the next year or so, be thinking, yep, do you know what? It's absolutely critical that we do send Fred or Frida off to that conference for 2 or 3 days, or that exhibition for 2 or 3 days? Or will they again be thinking, which is often a very short-sighted approach, but will they be thinking travel is one of the relatively easy lines on our balance sheet to remove a few pounds or dollars or euros from? So I think there's a whole series of challenges for mice, at least for the rest of this year, before any form of normality starts to return.
I mean, I think you make a very good point. I mean, at ETOA, we're very clear that the most important investment a company can make is in their membership fee, and secondly, they should be spending it on delegate fees at events. But sometimes people just don't agree with us for some reason, and they wish to stay alive. I think you're right. We're facing a situation where many companies are fighting for survival, and mice doesn't look like it's an important investment, but it doesn't look like a survival route. It looks like something you're doing when you're wanting to get stronger and expand. I think that's good. I think the only way we're going to find out about what the prospective growth in the mice market is if we start surveying our members. And I think this was one of the things we hope to start doing more actively and more creatively with in the hub. Now, I've got one more poll question I need to ask the audience, and I need to find it, which is buried somewhere. Here we are. One more poll we've got is, do you plan to offer new destinations as a result of coronavirus? It's, again, a super simple question with a super simple set of answers. There's yes, no, and not relevant. So you can choose that, and I will close it, I hope, within 30 seconds. Just can I just float another question that we've got here, and it's really a technical question about the nature of restrictions on travel in various destinations. And they're asking, have we got any research, or will we be able to do any research regarding the impact on what might be broadly described as anti-tourism regulations within cities? That means restrictions on coach access and principally city taxes. Has anyone said, it's really a question for David, have you ever seen any coherent research on the impact of tourism taxes on demand? And while you're thinking about that, I'm actually going to close the poll because we've got plenty of responses, and I'm actually going to share the results because I've now worked out how to do this. And the answer is it's not exactly even flip, but the ratio of people saying they're going to be offering new destinations as a result of this crisis outnumber those that are not by 2 to 1. So there's a reasonably clear win, I would say, for that thing. So that's the end of the poll. David, what's your position on city taxes?
I guess if you look backwards over the last few years, typically city taxes have been either fairly or unfairly claimed to be a development levy to help build the prosperity of the city. Sometimes it is just a way of getting revenue through the front door, and that revenue is not ring-fenced in any way to support the visitor economy in a city. But tourist taxes come in many different forms, either on accommodation, maybe transport, as you say, penalising coaches. But I think over the next year or so, cities around the world will be really trying to think, what do we want to be in terms of both a place to live, a place to work, a place to visit, and perhaps reformulating the subsidies and the taxes that they impose once they've decided, do we want to go for high value but lower volume tourism? Do we actually think that we still want to go back to the sorts of volumes that were there in the past? Whether there will be punitive taxes directly related to COVID is a really interesting one, because you will often find the law of unintended consequences. And apologies for giving a bit of a sort of personal anecdote, but my next international trip, which at the moment isn't cancelled, is due to spend a few days in Iceland in September, which may or may not happen. Now, Iceland has introduced a test on arrival setup, and at the moment that's free. From July, it's going to cost the equivalent of about £90. And I'm thinking, oh, that's effectively another night's accommodation that I'm going to have to pay on arrival. Is that going to actually, if I'm able to shift my flights and get some money back, would I do that? So I do think it's going to be interesting, all of the different costs associated with destinations trying to manage the risks from COVID-19, whether they will act as a deterrent to visitors from visiting in the first place, and will that be what they're wanting to do through those mechanisms? Maybe only time will tell.
Well, David, thank you. We've got a host of other questions. We've got tons of other things to discuss. We've actually got a number of very complimentary remarks coming through. Normally I just get sort of rudeness and abuse on these questions, but today we've actually got compliments both about yourself and Rachel being concise and to the point. This is not something anyone's ever accused me of being. We are more or less running out of time. One or two open things I just want to leave floating in the air. Somebody's written in and said that one thing to remember about MICE is that people have discovered that online meetings seem to work very well. And this may indeed be a challenge, or it may, you never know, suddenly increase the importance of person-to-person contact, because online contacts have limitations as well as virtues. And the other question is, has there been any report of demand for 2021 from the main scheduled operators? And the answer is, at the moment, the 2021 bookings look quite good, not least because a lot of the 2020 has cancelled and rescheduled for 2021. But on paper, 2021 is in theory looking good because we've got latent demand for Europe, and we have all the demand that was there in 2020 being rescheduled and pushed through. So we're going to have to wait and see what the prospects are. But again, this is a question that maybe we need to be polling our members more succinctly or more regularly on this. Ladies and gentlemen, we're formally out of time. I want to thank Rachel for putting the Insight Hub together, and thank David for joining us, and thank the audience for submitting questions and witnessing what we've been doing. Thank you very much indeed, and this is the end of the webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.